So the people who are supposed to be there to guide the people of Israel in spiritual matters take this one who has met the Messiah and put him outside of the flock, say, you are out. We go right from that. Jesus is now going to have a conversation about shepherding. He wants to talk about what is this thing? What is a shepherd? Who are the sheep? What is the gate? Who decides who's in and who's out? And he's about to go pretty hard on the spiritual leaders of the time.
So chapter 10, verse 1, very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he had brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep will follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. It's the third time he would use that phrase, I am. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate, and whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. I tell you, the thief only comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But I have come that they might have life and have it to the full.
So he's using here this picture that should be very familiar to everybody at the time. It's a very agrarian community. Whether or not, obviously not everybody was involved in shepherding themselves, but they would have seen it on a regular basis. Like, okay, there's sheep out there. We know the shepherd. Matter of fact, this is peppered throughout our history. When you look at the history of Israel, you almost can't separate it from that idea of nomadic shepherding. David, Abraham's sheep just keep showing up in the story over and over again. So it should have been a pretty obvious, and most of the audience does get it. But for some reason, with the Pharisees, there's this block. They don't understand. Maybe they don't want to understand, but they don't understand. But everyone else gets it.
I find it interesting today that there's this incredible kind of outing, if you will, of injustice in connection with people in power, men in power or whatever, using their power to abuse those under their care, both men and women. And here Jesus is in a very real sense, he's rebuking the keepers of the gates, the Pharisees, the people in power, for basically not shepherding and not taking care of those under their care. In fact, all through the Old Testament, God struggled with the people that he'd called to shepherd his people. In Jeremiah, you find these words. He says, woe to you, shepherds. When God says, woe unto you, it's time to fall on your face or try to run and hide. You who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you've scattered my flock and driven them away and have not bestowed care on them, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done, declares the Lord. So there's this idea that God takes very seriously the shepherding thing. You think, well, that was then and this is now. That was 2,000 years ago like you said, an agrarian society, and we don't have shepherds around. In fact, if you've ever met a shepherd, that's a pretty rare occurrence. I've met a couple when we worked down in Latin America, and they're kind of odd people. They live out in the wilderness, and they're not exactly mainstream, if you know what I'm saying. But we want to kind of unpack this morning, because if Jesus said this, there's something here for us in this whole idea of sheep and shepherds. And I know that even saying that right now, there's a tendency to just begin to kind of check out because I can't relate to the metaphor. So here's what Jesus says following on in chapter 10. We'll unpack this for you. He says, listen, I am the good shepherd. Fourth time he uses that term, I am. I'm the bread of life. I'm the light of the world. I am the gate. And now I am the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, he's not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees a wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. And then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hireling and cares nothing for the sheep. He's not an owner. But I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. And just as the Father knows me, and just as I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this pen. I must bring them also. And they too will listen to my voice, and they will be one flock and one shepherd. To begin to get your mind around what he is saying here, we're going to give you, if you're a note taker, this is a perfect message this morning. There's 3 things. And they're sequential, and you can't skip the steps. If you jump from 1 to 3, you're going to miss it. The very first thing is to understand what Jesus is saying, you have to understand what it means to be a sheep. You have to identify as a sheep to know him as the shepherd. And that is not an easy or a very popular thing to do.
Identify as sheep. Is that you? Did I just hear you back? That's what I... Okay, yeah. Everyone's pointing at somebody else. Yeah. That's good. When you got little kids, when they're real little and you can dress them in whatever, that's fun, right? Because they're kind of like little dolls. When we started fostering and we get a little baby into the house, my girls immediately get excited about what to put on him. Like, oh, what is he going to wear today? Whatever's at the top of the drawer, I just grab it and put it on him. Doesn't matter if it matches or not. He's a baby. No one's going to laugh at him. He's a baby. But they get so excited about that idea of dressing them up. And the ultimate, I don't know how many hats this little guy has that have ears on top of them, right? So he looks like a little bear, or he looks like a little sheep, or he looks like a little rabbit or something. And it's adorable. And when you're little, identifying as a sheep is kind of fun. Like, okay, that's all right. That's all right. I don't feel bad about identifying as a sheep when I'm little. And there's another time that it's okay to identify as a sheep. When's that?
In every funeral I've ever done, there's that famous passage of Scripture that says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you lead me. That's Psalm 23, right? It's the Psalm of comfort. Who hasn't seen that picture that was just on the screen at one time or another, that stained glass there with Jesus holding a little lamb? Children can relate to that so easily, like Jason is saying. You can relate to that kind of a strength. Oh, a shepherd, a man who's kind, and a leader who's gentle and caring. And then on your deathbed, you can relate very easily. In fact, probably easier than that, to this shepherd that is going to now walk with me, that I desperately need because I'm in this state of the end of my life. I'm mortal. I'm dependent. But in between is the part that I think we struggle with. That's hard to relate to.
It's hard to even look at.
It's hard to look at.
So what's the difference? The difference is sufficiency, right? Whether or not we're self-sufficient. Nobody expects a little kid to be self-sufficient. Everyone knows this little kid is going to need everything. Everything. He contributes nothing. I contribute everything to him. Sorry, do I sound bitter? I apologize. But it's true. You just know, like, okay, I'm gonna take care of your clothes. I'm gonna take care of your food. I am literally going to be wiping your bottom for you. There is nothing you can do for yourself. I'm going to do everything. And then when we get to the end of our lives, and I'm walking my dad, I remember, I'll never forget, having to carry/walk my dad to the bathroom, setting him down and thinking, okay, something's changed here. Something's different. He's no longer sufficient. And in his pride and in his strength, it's really hard to let that go. And yet he knows it doesn't matter if I want to let it go or not. It's gone. I need you. I need help. I need a shepherd. It's in between when we think we can do it on our own, when we think we've got everything under control, that idea of being shepherded, of being told what to do, of being led with a rod and a staff, and being moved from one place to another, told what's good for us or what's not good for us, that grates on us a little bit.
I'm not sure where this even starts. Somewhere around the time where your kid doesn't want you to drop him off in front of the school and be seen getting out of your car, right? Could you drop me off about a block away? I don't want people to know I have a mother and a father and I don't have a license. Remember that, right? And that's the beginning of this journey towards adulthood, towards independence. And that's not all bad, except this plays into our understanding and our image more than we want to admit. I mean, listen, come on. When you think of the metaphor of a sheep, what individual says, yeah, that's what I want to be known as? I mean, who has what sports team has a sheep as a mascot, right? I mean, come on. We have rams and bears and tigers as warriors. We're the Lebanon sheep. No, that's not very sexy or attractive, is it? Sorry, Coach. What country on their money or on their flag has a sheep? We have eagles and bears and lions. Those are the symbols of strength and sufficiency and leadership, right? Sheep are just not that popular. Sheep are basically very, very dependent, very docile, and frankly, they're not the smartest animal in the pen. You know, if you turn a horse loose or a dog loose or a cat loose into the wilderness, they're going to become, in a sense, wild, feral. They're going to learn to survive. Feral cats and wild mustangs and so forth. You turn a sheep into the wilderness, and he's just going to die. He'll eat poisonous plants.
A lot of sheep can't even survive in a pen.
Yeah.
They can't even survive in a pen. If something can get through the fence, they're toast.
I was in Chico, California a few years ago, and I was teaching at a YWAM center down there, and they have about 100 acres of land, and on this upper piece, they had a bunch of sheep on a pasture. And they noticed that one by one, the sheep started to disappear with no trace. There was they just couldn't figure it out. There was 62 one day, there's 60 the next, there's 57 the next. They started to get worried. So they put a fence, an 8-foot fence, a corral all around these sheep. They'd go in at night. They kept still disappearing. They're down to 51, 47. So they doubled the fence. They put about a 14-foot fence. They added 6 feet to it. The sheep continued to disappear. The night I got there, it was on a Sunday night. And I remember as I pulled in the driveway, there are all these fishing game guys, state wardens, and there's a guy walking around with a high-powered rifle. I said, hey, what's going on? He showed me this picture, and they had just shot a mountain lion whose hand, the paw, was like more than the size of my face. And they said, and what they did was they installed a video camera on this post, and this mountain lion would come in, and they had this camera, and he would jump this 14-foot fence. And the sheep, when they saw this mountain lion coming, they would all face inward. They would all put their heads together, and just their butts were sticking out. And the lion would just grab one of them and just go over the fence with the sheep in his mouth and disappear. They tracked it up into a canyon, treated it with dogs, and shot it. It's just not attractive being a sheep. It's just an awful life.
Have you ever seen a feral sheep?
Yeah, a feral sheep.
You ever seen that? Well, look out, that's a wild one. There's this crazy story.
This is what they look like.
Yeah, a crazy story happened a few years ago in New Zealand, Tasmania. This sheep got away from its shepherd. Now, because there were no natural predators out there, it lived mostly in a cave, came out and ate, and evaded capture for 6 years. 6 years this thing went unshorn. 6 years, it almost died, not because of wild animals, just because it didn't have a shepherd. And imagine, like, when it busted out of that fence, it must have been like, I'm free. I'm finally free. And then, after time, it just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. No one's going to take this off of me. And eventually, it just almost nearly dies just for lack of a shepherd. They finally corralled it and brought it in, and it was the wooliest sheep on record. 6 years without being shorn.
Think about this. If you can't see yourself as a sheep, the idea of having a shepherd will never be attractive to you. There's more to that than I think I can even put into words. If I can't ever see myself as a sheep, then the idea of needing a shepherd will never be attractive to me. Because then now, Jesus will not be seen as a shepherd. He'll be seen as a consultant or a doctor or a warrior or a king. And the funny thing is, he can be all those things. But he'll be temporary. He'll be on retainer. When I get in trouble, I'd like to have a lawyer on retainer. If I get in trouble financially, I'd like to have a friend who's a banker. And if I get in trouble physically, I'd like to have a friend who's a doctor. But a shepherd is there because he provides constant care for the sheep. And there's a big difference. Constant care for the sheep. So the second piece to understanding what Jesus is saying is, not only do I need to see myself as a sheep, hang with us here, there's hope here, but I need to really begin to hear and listen and tune my ear to hear a shepherd's voice, according to Jesus, because he said, if you're really my sheep, you're going to hear my voice. And so this idea of tuning the ear, it's a little bit more challenging than we like to admit.
Now, it might help a little bit to have just a little bit more historical context. The sheep would have been out during the day with their individual shepherds and brought to good pasture, but then at night they would all come into often a communal pen. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't just be your sheep, it'd be your sheep and their sheep and somebody else's sheep all in the same place. And when it was time to go, imagine trying to separate all those sheep. Like, how would you do that? Well, the way they do it is the sheep just knew who was their shepherd. I know, that's not my shepherd, that's my shepherd. And when they heard the shepherd's voice, they would go with that shepherd into the right pasture. So you see, there's this piece, I know none of us here are shepherds, but probably a lot of us have pets, and you know what that's like. Like, they know when you're home. There's something about you. You're the one. You're the alpha, hopefully, in your house. I hope your dog hasn't become the alpha. And they come to you. They love you. There's this amazing affection that happens there. And Jesus is capitalizing on that in their minds. He's like, you know how sheep know exactly who's supposed to be taking care of them? You know how they're not wild. They don't just listen to anybody and everybody, but they know exactly who would lay down their life for them and who wouldn't. That's me. He's describing himself here. Now, I'm the one. I'm the good one. Now remember, a hireling, someone who's just like, I'm just here to take care of the sheep for a week, and then I'm back to my other job. That's going to be a harder sell. How is he going to take care of those same sheep? Because he doesn't have the same relationship. He's going to have to use the rod and the staff not to protect, but to whack the sheep. And to keep, fear and punishment is going to be the way that he controls things, which is exactly what the Pharisees at the time were doing. You were afraid of them. That's how they kept control of the sheep. He's describing a completely different way of shepherding that should have really clicked in their minds at the time. Like, hey, you know how you've been abused? You've been told you need to lay your life down, but the people that are saying that would never be willing to lay their life down for you. That's not me.
Isn't it interesting that at the beginning of our lives, last night at North Campus, we dedicated a little 8-month-old baby. And the parents brought her up, and the aunts and uncles stood behind, and the grandparents stood behind. And we called upon the name of the Lord to bless this baby, to bless this little girl, to protect this little girl, to lead this little girl into all that God had for her. It's a moving thing. And then at the end of our lives, we're retiring. We're planning for our retirement. We're putting our house in order. And we call upon the name of the Lord. Man, I can't tell you how many times we've done funerals and people say, you got to say something good about Uncle John. It might be a stretch, but is there a scripture that applies to Uncle John? It's the most challenging thing in the world for pastors when you're not sure. But what about this middle piece of consulting a shepherd in all those years in between when we are going up and down on the hills of success and challenge? What about this checking in? I'm sitting up here and I can say, now this is going to sound hard to believe. And so those of you that are younger in this room, just hang with me. It's going to sound like an old guy thing to say, but I remember when there wasn't internet. What? People, sometimes I say that and people are like, are you kidding me? No, there wasn't. I remember when a cell phone was like a giant brick. It was like this big. It was on the side. Remember those? Some of you guys still have those. Hold on.
My kids asked me in the last few weeks, how did you do homework before the internet?
Yeah. There were these things. They were called books. Anyway, but this idea of noise, think about it. This generation now is a generation that has a quantity of noise that is unprecedented in all of history. I'm not overstating the fact. In all of history, right now, some of you have actually checked your cell phones 3 or 4 times in the last 30 minutes in this service. And there's this is an amazing, this is an iPad, so I'm not like anti-tech here. And on this iPad, I have a Bible program that probably has 20 Bibles in English on it. It's a wonderful resource. But I can't sit and listen to God's voice, even reading the Bible. It's a challenge to me with this particular little gizmo. Because while I'm reading the Word of God in 20 different versions, look, someone sent, they want to know what I'm doing tonight. And then over here is this news feed, and look at what he said now. Look at the tweet that just came over. And there's this endless competition for my attention. And listen, we can't listen to 10 people at one time, 10 voices at one time, and stay focused. And so what the generations before us have had for thousands and thousands of years is the idea of silence and solitude. And silence and solitude are more of a challenge than I think we even understand. I'd love to take your blood pressure right now. Because there are people in here, your blood pressure is literally going up right now, and I'm not even exaggerating. You're nervous because, are you going to say something? Somebody say something. This is awkward. It's just, I don't want to sit here in this room full of people and no one's talking. Man, somebody say, my finger's twitching. I just can't stand it. Silence is a challenge. But silence, when you shut out all the other voices, you begin to hear the one that's the most important.
I would just point out that the two main reasons why we struggle with silence is, one, when we're quiet, we're alone with ourselves, and some of us, that's a real struggle. We don't like to be alone with ourselves, because when all the other dials are turned down, the only one left is my own mind saying things, and there is a voice then. Even when we're silent, there is a voice. It's a conscious voice. It's sometimes it's a negative voice, sometimes it's a fearful voice, but we are afraid of that voice often. Even sometimes if we've found a way to be comfortable with that inner voice, the other thing that happens when we're alone and when it's quiet is there's a divine presence. Now, don't get me wrong, he's always there. But he generally doesn't scream over the other voices. He waits patiently because he's the God of the universe. He's eternal. He's got time. And he waits. And when we get alone, there's a sense in which we are now invited into the holy, into the presence of God. And if you think being alone with your own thoughts is scary, being alone with the holy God of the universe can sometimes be a little scary, right? What's he going to say? What's he going to ask? Is this going to be okay? Is what I'm doing right now okay? What does he think of what I did this morning? How does God feel about me? For some of us, that is still a scary notion. But Jesus is inviting us into something that's a little less scary, isn't it? Oh, this understanding of the divine is a shepherd who will die for me. If he'd die for me, he probably loves me. And maybe when I'm alone with him, it's not going to be so much a beating. Not that he won't have some things to say that might be a little painful, but maybe they're also going to be loving and kind. But to do that, we're going to have to turn down the dial on a lot of other stuff.
A blogger named COTH said this: social media are the fidget spinners of the soul. I talked to people over the years who say things like this: yeah, I tried Christianity, but it didn't work for me. It reminds me of the words of a writer from the last century, G.K. Chesterton, who said, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried." So some people say that Christianity is too difficult, or I tried it and it didn't work. What I suggest is that perhaps they've never actually tried the real thing. They've tried a kind of a superficial imitation of the real thing, a quick fix. God, come solve all my problems. God, come bail me out of this. And when he doesn't answer to our liking, we turn around and we walk away. But Jesus is trying to tell us something here. He's trying to tell us that, listen, I have an opinion for every situation you'll ever find yourself in. I'm the wisdom and the knowledge of the universe. And I'd like to make that available to you. And so this last one is, if we're going to listen, it will only do us any good if our heart is turned to obey. If we're not willing to listen to what he speaks, I want to say to you that the voice of God will grow dim in your ears and to your heart. You see, because it's this willingness to obey that is the signal of the heart that I want a shepherd. Sometimes, have you ever done this? Have you ever found yourself in big trouble and you all of a sudden, again, your prayer life comes alive and you're more than willing to listen. God, if you get me out of this, I swear, I promise, I'll go back to church. I'll give, I'll work in kids' church, whatever you want me to do. And so you're just so in tune. All of a sudden, your heart is just so alive to the voice of God. God, you got to speak to the judge. God, you got to speak to right? But you see, it doesn't work like that because God is looking for this attitude of the heart that leans towards him as a genuine shepherd and not the consultant, not the EMT. You see, when we're willing to obey, there's a whole nother realm of experience that opens up to us. Jesus said, the reason my Father loves me is I lay down my life. So Jesus is saying, listen, I'm going first in this. I'm both a sheep and a shepherd. Jesus is saying, I understand what it is to be both a sheep and a shepherd because I laid down my life. I was a sacrificial lamb. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. I wasn't a victim of circumstances. He says, I have the authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up. This is what I received from my Father. Jesus was about the Father's will. He only did what he heard spoken from the Father.
So a big, I don't know I'd guess at the statistic, but it feels like a lot of pastoring is conversations with people about them not being able to hear the voice of God. I'm often in conversation drawn to this place where someone will tell me something to this effect. Oh, I haven't heard from God in forever. I don't remember. God doesn't speak to me anymore. I don't remember the last time God said something to me. And everyone feels alone in that. Everyone feels like they're the only one who's experiencing that. And first of all, I want to say this. At the beginning of our walk, it is amazing, isn't it? That it just feels like God is everywhere. And he shows up and he's moving us from here to there and he's saying things and there's just this intimacy. And for some reason, over time, it becomes more challenging to keep that level of intimacy. And maybe we're never supposed to keep it exactly like that. Maybe it's supposed to grow. Maybe that's what growth looks like. But we start to often feel like, well, he just doesn't say anything to me anymore. And just a couple things about that. One, right under this point, we need to be willing to obey him when he speaks. Here's the first question I ask people if they tell me that they're not hearing from God. Like, well, what was the last thing he asked you to do? You scroll back in your mind to the last thing he asked you to do. Were you obedient to that? Because if you weren't, chances are he's not going to give you more information. He's not going to tell you more and more and more because you'll just be disobedient to that and he'll put you in greater and greater and greater condemnation. So more than likely, if you haven't heard anything from him, one of the things could be that you haven't done the last thing he asked you to do. Sometimes the way forward with God is to go backwards and to say, God, where was the last time I met you? Am I going the direction you sent me on at that time?
Imagine just being able to consult God at every turn of our lives. Psalm 23 is a psalm that was written hundreds of years before Jesus spoke these words, but it would have been very familiar to the ears of those who were listening. Psalm 23, man, when I fear that I'm not going to be taken care of, and the shepherd says, I am your shepherd, you will lack nothing. Psalm 23:1. When I'm agonizing over an important decision in my life, a career change, a mate, a struggle, God, what do I do? The shepherd says, listen, I'm going to guide you along the right path for my name's sake. When I'm feeling like my life is under attack and I'm a victim of injustice, I'm a victim of someone who is coming against me for no reason other than maybe jealousy or hatred, what do I remember? Lord, you prepare a table for me right in the presence of my enemies. When I'm facing death, which inevitably we all will face, but maybe it's not your mortality, maybe it's the death of a vision, maybe it's the death of a marriage, maybe it's the death of a dream, Maybe it's the death of a loved one. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. God is a constant shepherd. He's one who is there through thick and thin with us.
John 10:10.
You guys can come up, worship team.
The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. So here's, in a way, I want you to use this verse as a bit of a filter. So all the voices that are coming through to you right now, and again, this is not new information to you. You know, there's never been more voices. There's never been more people able to quickly amplify their voice through YouTube and other social media platforms. You know, the kid alone in his basement suddenly can have millions of viewers just right at their fingertips. Used to be there were 3 networks. If you got on them, you had a voice, otherwise, shut up. But now everyone has that ability. But ask yourself this question: is this voice trying to steal something from me? Is it killing something inside of me? Is this destroying something about my walk, my spiritual life with God? Or is this God? Is God speaking to me so that I could have life and have it abundantly? I would challenge you that there's really only one voice out there that gives life. There's one gate, there's one way in, there's one good shepherd. It might be time to cull the shepherd herd, to start cutting out some of those other things that are stealing my peace, stealing my attention, stealing my time with God, robbing me of a intimate walk with Jesus, destroying my relationship with Him, taking away my joy. And we go there thinking, I'm going to get filled up, I'm going to get filled up, I'm going to get filled up. There's something in here for me. There's information. There'll be something beautiful. Pinterest will do it this time. I know it will. I know this is low-hanging fruit to attack these things. I understand that. It doesn't matter. I'm telling us, we can be different. Matter of fact, the bride should be different. The bride should hear the groom's voice, recognize it, should be singular in their devotion, singular in their love, singular in their covenant, not letting anyone else into this relationship. This is between me and the Father. Father, everyone else I've let in, I'm sorry for being unfaithful to you.
In Eastern culture, sheep were the wealth of the shepherd. Some may be sitting here this morning thinking, I'm not sure what God thinks of me. I want to say to you that sheep were the wealth of the shepherd. The more sheep you had, the wealthier you were. The bigger your flocks, the more influence you had. A shepherd had a vested interest in his sheep. I think about that passage in Psalm 23 that I just read. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because thou art with me. I want to say to you this morning that the shepherd of your souls is not a hireling who runs when we're in trouble. He will go to the deepest depths with you. He will hang with you when others will quit. We know what it's like to be a good parent. When little Johnny is in the 2nd grade and he gets a promotion or he gets a part in the play and they dress him up and stand him on stage and we are there as parents. That's my Johnny. He's a genius. Right? But a good parent also knows what it is when Johnny lands himself in jail and someone has to go bail him out, and the humility of a father who walks in and says the same words. That's my son. That's the same one. Same Johnny that was on the stage 15, 18 years ago. I'm his dad. This shepherd will go to great depths with you. So much so that Jesus himself said, Which of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one who is lost until he finds it? And when he finds it, he doesn't drop kick it into tomorrow. He lays it upon his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and says, let's have a party, rejoice, because I found the one that was lost. Man, that is the heart of God for you. Peter said, we were all like sheep going astray, but now we've returned to the shepherd and overseer of your soul. As we finish this morning with communion, as you approach the table, I'd like you just to approach this table with this idea of a God who would go to the depths. It doesn't matter where you are this morning. It doesn't matter how many times you found yourself there. You have a shepherd that will not quit on you. When we grab the elements, we'll just hold on and then we'll take together when we're served.